June 22, 2013, the base camp of Nanga Parbat, Pakistan, more than 4,000 meters up the killer mountain. 16 men in paramilitary uniforms had climbed through the dark to reach it. That night, not one climber on that mountain would be killed by the mountain. This is the worst massacre in the history of climbing. Not on Everest, not on K2, no peak on Earth has a reputation quite like this one. Nanga Parbat, 8,126 meters, the 9th highest mountain in the world, and the westernmost giant of the entire Himalaya. Before a single human being ever stood on its summit, it had already killed 31 people. Avalanches, storms, whole expeditions swallowed in a night. The climbers who came here knew exactly what it was. They called it the Killer Mountain. But on this night, the Killer Mountain killed no one. The part that bothers me with this story is that it was not thin air and it was not bad luck. 11 people died because of a chain of decisions made by strangers hundreds of miles away, in a war none of the victims were part of. Welcome to Tourist Tragedies. To understand why what happened here is so shocking, you first have to understand the mountain, and you have to understand what base camp actually means. Nanga Parbat means naked mountain. The people who live in its shadow call it Diamir, which translates to King of the Mountains. It earned every one of those names. In 1895, the very first man who tried to climb it, a brilliant Englishman named Albert Mummery, walked around to scout a route and was never seen again, taken with 2 porters by an avalanche. In 1934, a German expedition was caught high on the ridge by a storm that would not stop, and its leader and several of his men died slowly in the snow. 3 years later, in 1937, an avalanche rolled over Camp 4 in the middle of the night and buried 16 men where they slept, almost the entire team, gone in seconds. It was not until 1953 that a single Austrian named Hermann Buhl finally reached the top, alone, without bottled oxygen, on a climb that lasted more than 40 hours and ended with him standing upright on a ledge in the dark because there was nowhere to lie down. That is like staying awake and working at the top of a skyscraper in a freezer for 2 full days without a break. And honestly, when you read what this mountain has done to the people who challenge it, you understand why climbers treat one specific place as sacred: base camp. The green meadow far below the ice, where the danger stops, where the tents go up and the prayer flags snap in the wind, and, for a few weeks every summer, you are finally safe. That safety is the thing this story destroys. So, how does a place this remote, this dangerous, fill up every June with people from a dozen different countries? Very simple. It runs on trust. Modern Himalayan climbing is not one hero against a rock. It is a small economy. The foreign climber pays for the permit, and the flights, and the years of training. But none of it works without the people who live in these valleys. The porters who carry 60 pounds up a glacier for days. The guides who know which slope is loaded and which is safe. And the cooks who turn a freezing patch of gravel into something that feels, for a few weeks, like a home. One of those cooks was a man named Ali Hussain. He came from a village called Hushain, tucked into a valley so far up in the mountains of northern Pakistan that most maps barely bother with it. His family were subsistence farmers, which is a polite way of saying they grew what they ate and not much more. There was no school for him, not really. What he had instead was the mountains. Learn the way you learn a language you are born into, one season at a time. By his late 20s, he had made himself into one of the good ones, a porter and a cook that expeditions asked for by name, and he had a plan. Ali did not want to carry other people's loads forever. He wanted to start his own guiding company, put his own name on it, and use the money to send his 3 children to the kind of school he never got to attend. He had a wife. He had a future he could actually see. That is the thing about a base camp. It looks, from the outside, like a cluster of tents on a rock, but every one of those tents holds a person with a plan exactly like Ali's. The Ukrainian who had spent 20 years learning to survive the death zone, the Chinese climber who had already stood on top of Everest twice, the young Lithuanian on his first great adventure. They came from thousands of miles apart, and they all ended up in the same meadow, eating the same meal, cooked over the same small flame. For a few days in June of 2013, that is exactly what base camp was. Picture it the way it actually was in the middle of that month. The Diamir base camp sits on a shelf of grass and stone, with the enormous west face of Nanga Parbat rising straight up behind it, so big it does not even look real. Down here, it is warm enough in the afternoon sun to sit outside a tent in a fleece. Up there, the wind is doing something violent to the snow. That contrast is the whole appeal. You can watch the deadliest wall in the range from a place where nothing can touch you. The camp this season was a genuine gathering of the sport. There were 3 Ukrainians, among them a seasoned alpinist named Igor Svergun, a man who had spent his life on the highest and most punishing peaks on the planet. There were 3 climbers from China, including Yang Chunfeng, who had already summited Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth, not once but twice. There were 2 Slovakians, Peter Šperka and Anton Dobesh. There was a Lithuanian, Ernestas Markšaitis, part of a larger international team. And there was a Sherpa from Nepal named Sona, one of the small brotherhood of high-altitude men who make everyone else's summits possible. Higher up the mountain at Camp 2 were the rest of that international team, including a young Polish climber named Alexandra Dzik, who was leading the expedition and getting her people ready for a push toward the top. Think about what a room like that actually contains. Between them, the people on Nanga Parbat that June had probably stood on more of the world's highest summits than almost any other group of humans alive at that moment. That is like putting the best surgeons from 6 different countries in one small tent, except the operating theater is a mountain that has killed dozens of people. And down at base camp, holding it all together, were the local staff, the porters from Hunza and Skardu and Husha, the cooks, including Ali. In the evenings, the camp did what base camps do. People drifted between tents. Somebody had a satellite phone and was calling home. Somebody was drying socks on a rock. The climbers who could not speak each other's languages found a way to talk anyway, because everyone there spoke the same one underneath. The language of people who have chosen to spend their short lives doing the hardest thing they can think of. There was money in the camp too, the practical kind. Cash in several currencies because that is how you pay porters and settle bills in a place with no banks. Satellite phones, radios, the ordinary equipment of an ordinary expedition, sitting in tents with the flaps open because who on earth would come all the way up here to steal it? You would need to walk for hours from the nearest track. Base camp was not guarded because base camp had never, in the entire history of the mountain, needed to be. The mountain was the danger. Base camp was the reward. For everyone in that meadow, on the night of June 22nd, life was, quite simply, about as good as this strange and beautiful sport ever gets, and every single one of them believed they were safe. They were not. To see what was already coming for them, you have to leave the mountain entirely and go back 3 weeks and several hundred miles to the south. May 29th, 2013. A missile fired from an American drone strikes a compound in the tribal region near the Afghan border and kills a man named Wali-ur-Rahman. He was the deputy leader of the Pakistani Taliban. To the wider world, it was one strike among many in a long, grinding conflict. To his organization, it was a debt. And so, a decision was made, not on the mountain, in a room by men who had never climbed anything in their lives. They wanted revenge, and they wanted it in a form that the entire world would be forced to look at. Killing soldiers no longer made headlines, but killing foreigners in a place foreigners believed was untouchable, that would echo everywhere. Someone among them knew the mountains. Someone knew that, high up on Nanga Parbat, there was a camp full of people from Europe and China and beyond, protected by nothing but distance. In the days before the 22nd, a group of roughly 16 men moved toward the peak. Along the way, they took 2 local guides by force and made them lead the way up, because the road to a Himalayan base camp is not a road. It is hours of climbing that you cannot fake. You need someone who knows the ground. And they carried one more thing. Uniforms. The uniforms of the Gilgit Scouts, the very paramilitary force whose entire job is to protect this region and the people who visit it. Hold on to that detail. A group of killers dressed as the men sworn to keep these climbers safe. It is going to matter more than anything else in this story. Night fell over the Diamir face. In the tents, people slept or lay awake, looking at the ceiling of nylon a few inches from their faces, thinking about the summit. Ali the cook had his kitchen squared away for the morning. Igor and Yang and Ernestas and the others were resting for the climb ahead. It was around 10 o'clock when the flashlights appeared at the edge of camp, and the men in uniform walked in out of the dark. At first, nobody was afraid. Why would they be? Help had arrived. To understand what happens in the next few minutes, you need to understand exactly why base camp had no defense. Because that is the real mechanism here, not a rope or a slope, but a hole in the world that nobody had ever thought to close. Start with the location. A Himalayan base camp is one of the most isolated inhabited places on the planet. This one sat at roughly 14,000 feet, reachable only on foot or on horseback, hours from the nearest rough track, and days from anything you could call a town. There were no soldiers posted there, no fence, no gate. The isolation itself was supposed to be the security. The thinking, for 100 years, had been simple. No one would ever come all this way to do harm because the mountain punishes anyone who tries. That logic had exactly one flaw, and the attackers found it. The only thing that could get a group of armed strangers past the suspicion of the local staff, past the climbers, right into the center of camp without a single person running or raising an alarm, was authority. A reason to be trusted on sight. And the fastest way to manufacture trust in that region is a uniform. This is why the disguise was not a detail. It was the entire weapon. In a place with no walls, the uniform was the wall the attackers walked through. The men who should have made everyone feel safe were exactly who the killers chose to impersonate, because that costume turned every instinct that should have protected the camp into the thing that opened it up. And the abducted guides solved the second problem, the ground itself. The attackers could not have found this camp alone, so they made local men lead them to the doorstep, then made sure they could never be identified as anything other than the paramilitary they were dressed as. Put those two pieces together, the uniform and the guides, and you have the whole grim engineering of it, a remote sanctuary undone not by force, but by trust. By the time anyone understood, it was already too late. Quick heads up before this next part. Every week I put out stories like this one, told properly, that you will not find anywhere else. If that is the kind of thing you are here for, please subscribe, now. Back to that night. The men in uniform move through the camp. They wake the climbers. They pull them from the tents. They gather the local staff and force one of them, a Pakistani climber named Sher Khan, to translate. At first, it looks like a robbery. They demand money, dollars, euros, anything. People hand it over. They give up the satellite phones and the radios, hoping that cooperation buys their lives. The attackers smash the electronics against the rocks. But this was never really about money. According to accounts pieced together afterward, the plan had a specific goal. One of the climbers, a man with dual Chinese and American citizenship named Chen Honglu, was meant to be taken alive, a hostage to trade for one of their own. It did not go the way they planned. In the middle of it, Chen fought back. He broke free and threw himself at one of the gunmen, hand to hand, using martial arts, a single unarmed man against a rifle. The gunman panicked, and he fired. In that one instant, the whole cold plan collapsed into something else, and there was no walking it back. The climbers were tied. They were lined up. Sher Khan and two other local men were made to kneel with the rest, faces turned away, and told not to look up. Then the shooting started. It came in bursts. Sher Khan heard it and could not stop himself from turning, and he saw the man tied beside him fall. At the very last moment, for reasons no one will ever fully know, the attackers pulled the three local staff back out of the line and let them live. Everyone else in that meadow was gone. And then, the mountain went quiet. High up at Camp 2, the rest of the international team knew nothing yet. It was around 6 the next morning when a phone rang. Sher Khan had gotten his hands free, and he was calling to warn the climbers above not to come down. "Do not descend. They are still here." When Alexandra Dzik and the others finally reached base camp, the army had already arrived. Helicopters had come for the bodies. But the camp still told the story. The torn tents, the casings, the place where their friends had knelt. 11 people were dead. 10 climbers and 1 local man. 3 Ukrainians, 3 Chinese, one of them the hostage the plan had centered on. 2 Slovakians, a Lithuanian on his first great expedition, a Sherpa from Nepal, and Ali Hussain, the cook from Hushe with the 3 children and the plan to build something. He never got to start the company. His wife became a widow that night, and his kids lost the future he was standing on that mountain to pay for. Shere Khan survived, but he did not walk away whole. In the months after, sleep became impossible for him. Every small noise was a threat. Every quiet room turned back into the line of tents. He had lived, and it followed him anyway. That is the cost that never makes the headline. Not the 11 who died in a few minutes, but everyone attached to them, spread across 6 countries, waking up the next morning into a world with a hole in it. When you lay the facts down in sequence, a terrifying picture begins to form. Because this was not one act of evil, it was a series of separate failures, each one survivable on its own, that lined up perfectly on a single night. Layer 1. A drone strike far to the south kills a militant leader and creates a demand for revenge that has nothing to do with any climber. Layer 2. The men who want that revenge need a target that guarantees the whole world will look, and they land on the one group no one is protecting: foreign tourists on a mountain. Layer 3. The target they choose has zero physical security, because for 100 years its remoteness was considered security enough. Layer 4. The one thing that could still stop them, the suspicion of the locals, is defeated by a costume. The uniforms of the protectors become the key to the door, and there it is. The open loop from the very start of this story. The uniforms were not a disguise the attackers wore to escape. They were the weapon they used to get in. Layer 5 is the cruelest. Remoteness, the thing that had always been the climber's danger, the very reason a base camp felt safe, is the thing that finally traps them. Too far for help to arrive in time. Too far to run. Safety experts have a name for exactly this. They call it the Swiss cheese model. Every layer of protection has holes in it, and disaster only happens on the rare occasion when the holes in every layer line up into a single clear tunnel. On the night of June 22, 2013, every hole lined up. And the consequences did not stay on that one mountain. For years afterward, the mountain emptied. Expeditions were canceled across the whole country. Insurers marked the peaks as too dangerous. And the villages that survived on the climbing season, villages like Ali's, lost the income they lived on. A single night reached out and quieted an entire range. The climbers who came to Nanga Parbat believed, the way climbers always have, that they were guests of the mountains, and that the mountains would only ever test them fairly. Herman Boole once called the mountains silent teachers of humility and courage. That is the promise this sport is built on. 11 people died because a war they had no part in reached across the world and found the one place on Earth no one thought to guard. If you had been at Camp 2 that night and gotten that phone call at dawn, what would you have done next? Tell me in the comments.